Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about absolute value. Okay, it's a very important concept that comes up starting in pre-algebra and moves all the way up into many higher levels of mathematics. Okay, so in this video, hopefully we're going to define what absolute value is and talk about simplifying expressions involving absolute value. Okay, so what is the definition of absolute value? The absolute value of some number x is the distance from x to 0. And it's written this way with an x inside of two straight vertical lines here, line segments. Okay, and it's just the absolute value of x is how we read this when we say it. And it means, again, the distance of that number to x. Okay, so let's take a look at that on the number line and talk about a couple finite examples here. And what we have here is read the absolute value of 5, which is translated the distance from 5 to 0. Okay? So if I just went to 5 on the number line and noted where 0 was and counted the spots, I would in fact very easily just get 5 spots. So its distance from 0 is 5. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. Doesn't seem too thrilling, but it's a fact that we need to resolve and apply in many places. So here, in this next example where it says the absolute value of negative 5, that can be translated the distance from negative 5 to 0. Okay? So if I just note where negative 5 on the number line is and reference it against where 0 is again, I just noticed that its distance is also 5. Some people want to say negative 5, but that is not the case. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Okay? Now, a lot of people get into this shortcut of saying, oh yeah, we'll change the sign, that's all you do. But that's not really true if you look closely. Because although I change this negative sign to a positive, I'm not changing this positive to a negative. So that's not a good rule, okay? Some people make a little better rule and say, oh, if the number you're doing the absolute value of is positive, leave it alone. If you do the absolute value of a negative, make it positive. Well, that is true, but the one thing is you cannot let go of the idea that it has to do with this idea of distance. And distance is non-negative. Okay? It's a very important idea in mathematics that distance is non-negative. Therefore, we could say the absolute value of x is always greater than or equal to 0, which means it's just 0 or positive, which by definition is non-negative. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at solving some examples, simplifying some expressions that involve absolute value. And if you notice, they're a little more complex than the ones we did in the definition. And for us to be able to do that successfully, we need to talk about the rules of order with absolute value. When we talk about order, we always talk about PEMDAS, okay, as being a guiding principle in how we simplify non-variable expressions. And then I guess the question is, where does absolute value fit into PEMDAS? Well, you want to treat absolute value like a grouping symbol, okay? Somewhat like it's a set of parentheses or a set of brackets, okay? Absolute value, you want to think of it as having priority at that level in terms of how you deal with groups, okay? And a very good practice is to always simplify completely inside the absolute value bars before taking the absolute value. This is very important, okay? Because we take the absolute value of a number, it should be simplified down to the most simple form we can get it to before we take the absolute value. So when we fail to read this appropriately, we make mistakes that are sort of based in poor use of order and poor use of signs. So let's take a look now. In these examples where it says, let us simplify expressions with absolute value, we'll treat the directions as just very simply to say, simplify the following. So here we have the absolute value of 4 minus 10. Well, I need to work inside the absolute value bars and kind of simplify it down to one number as best I can. So the absolute value of 4 minus 10 is the absolute value of negative 6. Then by applying the definition, I could say how far is negative 6 from 0, and that would give me 6. Excuse me. Okay. Notice I didn't do any sign changing up here in this first row. Okay, I simplified the expression on the inside of the absolute value bars first. It's always a good practice. Okay, these are just elementary examples. I'm sure they could become a little bit harder, but I think we'll demonstrate some rudimentary things that have to be mastered to do this well. Okay, so now we have in number 2 the absolute value of negative 5 minus 20. So again, I need to work inside the absolute value symbol as if it's a group and simplifying negative 5 minus 20. So I'll bring down my absolute value bars and then say the absolute value of negative 5 minus 20 is negative 25. Okay, and then I'll ask the definition kind of question here that is what is absolute value of negative 25? It is the distance from negative 25 to 0. Okay, so that is just going to be 25. So in number 3 here, it says negative 5 times the absolute value of negative 12. Now this is where people really fall for a pitfall here, and they say, oh, it's a negative times a negative. So the answer will be positive. And we know that absolute value gives me positive answers, so that's probably right. Well, you have to be more careful than that here, because we said you have to get the inside simplified down to one number. And in this case, inside the bars is simplified to negative 12. But for us to do negative 5 times the absolute value of negative 12, I have to say what the absolute value of negative 12 is first. So I'm going to say it's negative 5 times the absolute value of negative 12, which is 12. Because negative 12 is 12 away from 0. So then I continue to simplify there, and I actually see that, in fact, I get a negative answer. Okay? Which is fine, because I've taken an absolute value, which is positive, and then multiplied it by a negative. So that should make sense that I got a negative answer. So in number 4, this example says 3 times the quantity of the absolute value of negative 7 plus 2 times negative 4. Well, here there's a little more PEMDAS at work. I need to be able to simplify inside the absolute value bars first. So I'm going to simplify negative 7 plus 2 times negative 4. And if you see, I have a plus and a times there, so I need to make a decision of what comes first using PEMDAS. So I will do the multiplication first. My general rule is when I use these identifying boxes is I just copy everything that's outside the box and then do the answer of what's inside the box. So we've got 3 times the quantity of the absolute value of negative 7 minus 8. Okay, and then I'm going to continue to simplify inside the absolute value to get it down to one number, or it looks like one number at least. And then I will do 3 times the absolute value of negative 7 minus 8 is negative 15. And now for me to do 3 times the absolute value of negative 15, I need to know what the absolute value of negative 15 is first. So I will do 3 times the absolute value of negative 15, which just means simply times the number that is equivalent to the distance of negative 15 from 0, which is in fact 15. So 3 times 15 is equal to 45. Okay? So some basics about absolute value. I'm just going to pull up the calculator real quickly so that I can show how in this last example you can use your calculator as a device that's going to help you check your answers. Okay, I just needed a moment to shrink that there, so I'll turn the calculator on. And the question becomes, how do we get absolute value onto our calculator? So I'm going to check this problem number 4 here. Okay, so at first we're going to have to say 3. And then we'll say times the absolute value of something. So I'll say times. Then I'll say math button. Now if you notice, when we hit math, if we hit right arrow, the first thing in that menu is ABS, which stands for absolute value. So now I have 3 times the absolute value of a quantity because it sets up the parentheses. I didn't have to type that times sign. If I just would type 3 absolute value, it would know to do multiply. So I'll do -7 plus 2 times -4. Use the right parenthesis to close off the -4 and another parenthesis to close off the one that was offered to me when I did absolute value. Just hitting enter, and we could see that the answer is in fact 45, just like I was able to compute by hand. Okay, so that's absolute value in a nutshell. We'll just review it really quickly. We need to remember that the absolute value is the distance from 0 to the given number, okay? And we talked about that distance is never going to be negative. It's going to be 0 at minimum or positive. And then we also want to talk about how to simplify with absolute value. We need to treat absolute value bars as a grouping symbol. And then we need to make sure that we simplify completely inside the bars before taking the absolute value. So there's a little bit of broing with this. There's some subtleties here that you have to sometimes make the mistakes to realize you're making them. But using them against your calculator sometimes can help you adjust your reading process around this. And that'll be often what it is, the reading in the order of what you're doing. So it's subtle. It takes a little practice. So feel free to rewatch, and good luck.